Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And just so you all know, Domino is still too small to jump up onto this counter. So here's the deal. If she starts trying to pull at my leg, which she does when she wants to be lifted up, then I will put her on there. But if she doesn't, she doesn't, okay? I don't know what's going to happen here. She is around, but right now she's doing some exploring, I think. So anyway, today I've got a video that is actually a response to some other videos that have been going around on YouTube. You might have seen this this question of, could you play D&D with a Trump supporter? And I think it's a very interesting thing that has popped up there, because we all know where that originates from. And actually, I think the real origin, excuse me one sec, there we go. The real origin of the question comes from, I think it started out from the conversation about a post that one of the people in charge of Pathfinder said, where they had heard that J.D. Vance, J.D. Vance was a Marine. And the Marines, a lot of them play RPGs when they're stationed out somewhere, because of course you have limited options for entertainment, and RPGs are a very good, a very easy sort of thing to be able to do to entertain yourself. And so there was that account that supposedly J.D. Vance had played D&D or something. And he came out and said, well, I don't want, J.D. Vance shouldn't be allowed to play Pathfinder or something like that, right? That he doesn't want J.D. Vance playing Pathfinder, and that it was all this kind of spite about how dare a conservative play Pathfinder. And then we've had a couple of videos, some that have been in reaction to the earlier videos, about the question of, can you play D&D with a Trump supporter? And I think it's a very interesting set of arguments that have been created there, right? But before I get on to that, let me give you a quick in-video promotion here, which is that as of yesterday, the newest issue of the Pundit Files has come out. You can see over here I've got the Old School Companion, number 2, which is full of medieval authentic adventures. Well, the Pundit Files have a number of issues that are also medieval authentic adventures, some of them for Lion and Dragon, but some of them for Baptism of Fire. And my newest issue of the Pundit Files, issue 27 if I'm remembering correctly, is called The Bones of St.Florian, and it's set in the Baptism of Fire setting, but you can easily modify it to some other setting if you really wanted to. And it is a medieval authentic adventure where the player characters are basically called into a holy quest of sorts, in which they are trying to find the long lost relics, that is to say the bones of a Roman era saint that they received from this vision, and they have to go way out into the deep Wilderlands to try to find it. It's a very interesting adventure, and it also has there the details about St.Florian and the effect of having his relics around, which is stuff that you also find in 101 Sarmatians, in the appendix to 101 Sarmatians. There's a complete section on the veneration of saints and which saints were known and venerated in Piast era Poland, and the mechanics that there is if your character wants to pray to these saints, and what can potentially happen if you seek their assistance in what is their area of patronage. So be sure to check out 101 Sarmatians too. I'd have it here, except that my author copies have not even begun to arrive. That's the situation. So you guys all know how this goes, right? Because I'm living in South America, so It's going to be weeks before 101 Sarmatians gets here. When it does, of course, I will be doing flip through video. So check that out. The Bones of St. Florian, available at the Red Room store. The link is in the description of this video, along with links to all of my other games, including stuff like Arrows of Indra. And that over there is the Wilderlands sourcebook for Sword and Caravan. But there's lots and lots of others, so be sure to check them out. All right. So, obviously there have been kind of a pair of different arguments about this. And so some people have said, I haven't seen anyone until mine, that says, could you play Dungeons & Dragons with the liberal, right? But the argument about can you play Dungeons & Dragons with a Trump supporter has basically had either people say, no, we shouldn't, right? Because they're going to be harmful to the mental health of people, or they're going to be dangerous, or they shouldn't be invited into polite society, in as much as anyone could call a leftist society polite. And then on the other side, you have people saying, well, no, it shouldn't matter because, also we want people to be able to get in play these other ideas that they might not get, right? Like, which, if you're being very generous, is like, maybe they just mean, well, the way we're going to game is going to be different. It'll be a new experience for them. But more likely, it sounds like they're saying we could try to indoctrinate them in the game, right? Which, of course, if you're playing with a leftist GM, is something that is likely to happen to some degree. I'm not saying every leftist is going to run a game where the central focus is ideological re-education, but I'm also not saying that isn't common. So the question here for everybody, I think almost all of you who watch this channel are probably, at the very least, you're not likely to be people who have this Trump derangement syndrome or something. But I suspect that most of you are inclined towards the right anyway, so that really wouldn't be a likely question for you. But the question is, can you roleplay with a liberal, with someone from the left? And yeah, I'm using liberal in the American sense here of just meaning a leftist, right? Not as in somebody who has liberal values, which are a whole different thing. But fundamentally, the real question there is, how is this person likely to behave? Okay. So in my own experience, none of my games, either how I wrote them or how I run them, are about indoctrination in real-world politics. And, my impression is that there are far more left-wing DMs, or to say nothing of left-wing game designers, who introduce elements of real-world politics, whether it's culture war politics or whether it's, Marxist ideology or things like that, into their game play. Whereas I think that, I'm sure that there might be a few people who have games that are in some way sending contemporary right-wing political messages, but I think for the most part, most gamers that are, let's say, Republican voters or what have you, conservatives, they generally are not spending their time when playing D&D or OSR games or what have you, Arrows of Indra or Baptism of Fire. They're not spending their time in that trying to shoehorn 21st century political messages into ancient mythological India or Piast era, early medieval Poland, So for a start, we could say that in theory, presuming goodwill on the part of the liberal, there is far less that is likely to create a conflict for a liberal playing a game run by a conservative than the other way around, which is, again, not to say that every single liberal would have contemporary political messaging in their game. But besides that, of course, the other factor is how that liberal behaves, and to certain degrees it depends on what type of left-wing person they are, right? We forget, because especially people who spend a lot of time on the internet, you end up watching on social media, all over social media, this largely overrepresented group of people who are absolutely extremist in their left-wing views, right? The people that are kind of pro-Antifa and pro-Hamas, and they're obsessed with gender politics or race politics or sexual politics or what have you. And it's very easy to forget that in real life, those people are maybe like 8% of the population, right? Which means that the likelihood of running into someone like that in a gaming group is very low. Of course, a lot of people are probably gaming, I don't know if a lot, but I would say that a significant percentage anyways of people are gaming with people who are already their friends, right? So in some cases, people you've played with since high school and whatever. And in those cases, well, as long as none of your friends ended up like developing Trump derangement syndrome, you probably don't have a problem to begin with, right? But, you might also still have in that group also people who, some of them might still vote Democrat if you're in the US, right? Or Liberal if you're in Canada, or Labour if you're in the UK. There might be some people who are doing that, right? But also there is the question of the long-standing friendship, which means that people might be more likely, we hope, to behave. In other groups, though, if what you have to do is, well, you have to see what kind of behavior these people enact, right, in their gaming. And there are kind of three different levels, right? There's the person who's, again, very mild, moderate kind of left-wing voter who maybe, they might believe in some of these ideas that you don't believe in, but they're not obsessed with them, right? So they're not going to bother about that in the game. That's a green light, basically, right? That's fine. Then you might have some people who are not necessarily intentioned to try to disrupt a game, but they bring with them certain elements of indoctrination, of bias, that might mean that while they're not trying to, turn your game into a struggle session, they might unwittingly have issues that will create challenges in the game, because you can have, you can have someone who's like, he's a nice guy or a nice person and is a D&D player. They know how to play the game and they're in the game, and then suddenly you have something, I don't know, there's slavery in your setting, right? And it's not that you're presenting slavery as if it was a good thing or anything like that, right? You're presenting it as what almost everybody who I've ever seen, and certainly in every printed book, presents it as, which is a type of pitiable bondage that is not fundamentally a good thing, right? But they say, well, no, the mere presence of this in the world is offensive, right? Or they might be complaining, or they might want to create a character that will have a type of diversity that doesn't fit the context of the setting, right? And then that could become a triggering point, So these people will then you'll have to either explain to them, look, you have to enter into a different paradigm to do this. And that might be very hard in and of itself because they probably don't understand how paradigms work. And, then you might have a guy who would be like, well, can't we just find out what the problem is that these orcs have so we can help them and they'll stop attacking us, or something like that. Those things can happen, right? And then the third, and the one that's the definite red light, is someone who really cannot stop being political at every moment and will want to infuse that in their games. And I will note that it's entirely possible at the same time that you could have a conservative person, even if you're an entire group of, let's say, Trump voters, there could be like that one guy there that doesn't get that you're not running the game, especially a game where you're all conservatives, to own the libs or something like that, but he's going to intentionally introduce right-wing politics that will be like, that he thinks he's being really cool or edgy for doing it, but doesn't do anything for the game, right? So that can theoretically be a problem as well, you know. In my own game, the basic point is that if you're running a group and it's a group of people who are real gamers, and by real gamers what I mean is that they're interested in the RPG to play, right? They're willing to follow the protocols. They're willing to immerse themselves in the game. And they're there for the game, not for other reasons. Then there's a very good chance that, let's say you make a group and everybody's in on the basic principles of RPGs, you might end up playing for years with those people and never find out how they vote, right? And that's really the ideal as far as I'm concerned. My longest running game, which maybe I should have put out here so you guys can see it, is World of the Last Sun, which is a campaign that is getting close to its 12th birthday now. So it's almost been for 12 continuous years of play. It's had a lot of people coming and going. It's got a bunch of regulars and then has other people that play for a while and then stop, and new people that come in, right? And when a new person comes in, I don't know what their politics are, but I do know about some of the long-term players, right, that have been involved in that game. And we have people that are very much to the right of me, to the point that I might have some serious political differences with them from the right. And then we have people, we've got a guy who's like a Euro-socialist, you know, like a European-style progressive. We've got another guy who, he's not playing right now, but he was playing before, and I hope he will be soon again. It's just a question of his job. Another guy who is a literal member of a Trotskyist party in this country. It's a very small party, so he never wins anything, but that's his problem, not mine, right? But I only kind of found out about this over long periods of gradual time as we got to kind of like know each other better as players, because this is my longest lasting playing group, right? And so I've got people to the left of me, people to the right of me, and yet in that game when we're playing, nobody gives a crap about it, right? And in fact, because Last Sun is a Gonzo game, it is a little bit different than most of my other games, right? Because if I'm playing, you know, Lion and Dragon, then the idea is all the characters, everything that's going on should fit the medieval paradigm. It should fit the mindset, the worldview of being your character, who is a character in the Middle Ages, right? So any politics that might exist would have to be medieval politics, right? It wouldn't be anything contemporary. But World of the Last Sun is a Gonzo game, and it has a lot of elements that are kind of parodying our world, our real world, so to say. It's not an overtly political game by any means, but it's a game that makes fun of almost everything, right? And its thematic tends to be about kind of failure in general, right? And that includes, you know, making fun of, like, presenting almost everything in the worst possible light, right? And I'm in terms of those of you who've read some of the materials from World of the Last Sun will realize that I try my very best to make an equal footing of mockery of every kind of idea or perspective, whether I like it or dislike it, you know. And so, you know, some of this stuff could come out in the game, but when they're playing, my players don't let their own politics interfere with that, right? If they did, it would really not work as a game for them. So, like, you know, the guy who's a Trotskyist, he has no problem playing, you know, a badass warrior that just, like, you know, is not particularly bright, and he wants to, like, destroy everything in his path, you know, and at the same time he claims he's a pacifist, and all this kind of ridiculous stuff, you know, and there's a channel on YouTube, Bill the Elf channel, right? Which is, Bill the Elf is the longest surviving character of the World of the Last Sun. The only original character from the beginning of the campaign that is still alive. And the player of Bill the Elf records the audios of our games, right? So you can go to the Bill the Elf channel, you can hear us playing. It's no video, it's just audio, but you know, there you will get a very good idea of what that kind of game is, right? And there's I can't say for sure that that is the most politically diverse gaming group I've ever had, because in a lot of my other gaming groups, I've never gotten to the place where I needed to, where I had the opportunity to know what someone's politics were, right? And if that's the situation, then it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what your other players' politics are, and they don't show up at the table. So it's, you don't have to shoot it down, you don't have to endorse it, you don't have to mollycoddle people, because they're all being correct as gamers. The problem happens when people are incorrect as gamers. And that brings us back to the core question. I would say, in the right conditions, if a person is playing well-intentioned and is trying to buy into the nature of the RPG hobby experience, then there shouldn't be a problem. But of course there are going to be people who will have a problem. But there's another problem relating to this, which is, I think, no one has really touched on, right? Which the real question is, can you play D&D with a postmodern leftist DM? Because a Trotskyist is one thing, right? Like, yes, they have really terrible economic ideas, and they have some pretty bad political ideas, and they are almost certainly atheists, and they are kind of stupid economic model modernists, But if you're talking about a postmodern leftist, if you're talking about someone who's the kind of the like what most progressives in the United States are today, where they are these critical studies people who are relativists, who talk about that reality is just a narrative. Those people, I don't know if you can play a game run by them, even if they didn't bring any actual political elements into it, because those people aren't actually capable of understanding how to create a living world. So, I mean, I guess you could play with them, but what they would be making is this. It's going to look like a lot of current year TV shows, right? It's going to be full of, oh my God, so random stuff. It's going to be full of stuff that is that is exposition that shouldn't have been done in the form of exposition. It should have been done through playing it, right? It's going to be full of all these kind of shallow referential appearances of things and creatures and people and stuff and events that don't have any underlying solidity to them, because they can't understand the nature of symbolism, they can't understand the nature of myth, they can't understand the hero's journey, and if they and what little they can grasp of it makes them think that it's bad, right? So they would at most they might make a deconstructionist version of the hero's journey, where doing the hero's journey is a bad thing, and in the end you're wrong for having tried. It's the classic part of the second Star Wars movie, the new Star Wars movies, where you have, what's his name, the fighter pilot guy. Is that Poe Dameron? I think that's his name. Who, at the very beginning of the movie, they're fighting this enormous super star destroyer, and he goes in with a tiny group with this perfect plan, that has a 1,000,000 to 1 chance of succeeding, and all of this sort of stuff, which is exactly, the director of that film took that directly out of every other Star Wars movie up until that moment, right? Because in every other Star Wars movie, the myth of Star Wars in that context says, well, what you need is a heroic person to fly in and do some crazy thing that stands 1,000,000 to 1 shot, and then he's going to make it, and he'll end up saving the day in that way. Except that they invert it with, they deconstruct it, so that in the end he was horribly wrong for having done it, right? And he is then, instead of being the hero and getting the medal, Admiral Dangerhair shows up, talks about being a feminist, and punishes him, right? And because he was a stupid man, right? And he doesn't understand what he's doing, because that's not actually the way to solve anything, right? So that's what somebody who has been raised on postmodernist liberal theology, or let's say progressive theology, is going to end up, and I'm saying theology because it's basically their substitute for religion, right? That's how they're going to interpret all of these elements. And the fact is, RPGs largely depend on the elemental structure of myth. Right? It certainly depends on the hero's journey. Certainly D&D does, where it's literally modeled in a kind of hero's journey format. You start as a level 1 guy and you end up becoming like this superhero, right? So maybe you could play in that group, but you'd be pretty miserable, I would think, right? Whereas the average Trump person, even if they're not educated, like let's say they haven't read Joseph Campbell or read, the Mahabharata or any other ancient myths or any books about this subject. They're not, a university professor who studied history and comparative religion or any of that stuff. But they, being Trump voters, that DM is much more likely to have it inherent in his subconscious from the material that he has seen, from things that he's read, from stories he's heard, even as watered down as they might have been in the 20th century, they'll have this instinctual grasp that most people throughout the world have always had, because you really have to do an enormous effort, which is what has happened in our society, to train people to the opposite, right? You have to deeply indoctrinate them to break away from this idea of understanding symbol and understanding myth. Because that is something that is inherent to humanity. All the myths throughout the world derive from these same origins, and they have the same formulas, right? They have the same precepts and concepts, different appearance, of course, right? Like, the Mahabharata looks very different from La Morte d'Arthur, but it's still the same concepts and virtues, those universal virtues of humanity that are inculcated in there. And these ideas about virtue and about heroism. And so that guy, he might be, a farmer or a trucker or something, a construction worker, somebody that doesn't have any special level of education. But when he's running the game, he will instinctively know how to have people be heroes and how to have villains be villains and how to have these stories take on a symbolic level. That unfortunately, there's that saying that certain ideas are so idiotic that only an intellectual could believe them, right? So the highly educated college graduate leftist has had sufficient years of being indoctrinated to the point where they can't even comprehend these things. That would make their games inferior. And so you could probably, if you're a DM, you could probably play with someone from the left, unless they're like the tiny 8% of unbearable people. But if you're a player, I'm not sure you could stand, at least not for very long, to play a game where they were the DM. All right, that's everything for today. Let me know what you think in the comments. Share this video everywhere that you can, anywhere that people find it interesting, or wherever people will be pissed off about it. And please check out all of my products. Baptism of Fire, it's a super bestseller. And then check out 101 Sarmatians, the first big source book for Baptism of Fire. And those are on DriveThruRPG. The links are in my description. All my other games, the links are there too, mostly to DriveThru. And of course, check out the Pundit Files. There's 27 issues of the Pundit Files now. Tons of stuff there for you to find and enjoy. And you can get those only at the Red Room. Every issue of the Pundit Files only costs $3.50. What the heck are you... Okay, I better go. It appears that Domino has gotten into a war with a garbage bag. I'll see you all later. Currently smoking. This is a beautiful Ben Wade Canadian with Argento Latakia.